Hello, it's Matt Linklater here, and I want to share with you a story of a client over the last week and a half because I think it's probably very pertinent to your business and to your growth, if you will. So the backstory is a few years back, a client came to me and shared with me that the current accounting and CPA office they were using was charging them $500 a month and was supposed to look at their P&L on a monthly and quarterly basis, and they weren't doing anything of the sort. So they said, hey Matt, will you take a look at my finances and tell me what's going on? So we implemented one strategy and we're able to cut the tax bill by $15,000. So then obviously the relationship is off to a start there. And so we've had this client for a while. Well, just recently they got the opportunity from a large hotel chain to put their business in the hotel chain, if you will. And so they came to me and said, well Matt, I'm going to need funding for this. I know you know this. How do you do it? And so I said, well, you know what, before we just kind of dive right in, come into the office and let's sit down. And so as you can imagine, as a business owner and an entrepreneur, there's a million ideas going at once. And so what I put in place is something that I just call my reverse engineering process. And I'm going to give that to you right now. We can go in depth another time, but I'll give you this simple process right now. Is number one, you have to, what gets measured gets done. So whatever you have in your mind, you have to figure out, how do I measure it, all right? So number two is start with the end in mind. So you have to start with the end in mind. Number three is then you have to work backwards. So you have to start with the end in mind and work backwards to now. Number four is break it into actionable increments. And then number five is use self-to-self measurement. And self-to-self measurement is just how do you measure yourself along the way to make sure you're following that process. Now I don't want to go too far in depth there. We can do that on another video and podcast, but I just wanted to share with you the methodology. The first one that this client had was they wanted to buy a house. And so I looked at the house and I said, we got to put in this amount into the house. We believe it's going to kick out this amount. And I said, well, is that worth the risk? And they said, well, you don't think I should buy it? I said, well, no, that's not it, because I want everyone to make their own decision, because the last thing I want to do is tell somebody yes and no, because, believe me, if you looked at most entrepreneurial ideas out there, 99% of the people would say, don't do it, it's too risky. So I never want to do that to anybody. But what I want to do is just reverse engineer what they think is going to happen so they can tell me if that's really what they want to do. So as I reverse engineered it, and I just said, okay, well, you're putting X in, you got this amount of carrying costs on this house, and you're going to sell it for this, and these are the costs associated. And so when you kind of break all that down, is it worth it or not? And then we said, well, okay, you got this one opportunity over here with this big hotel chain. How do we get that done? And so that wasn't, most people would just say, okay, let's do that. I'm always thinking 2, 3, 4, 5 steps ahead. So I sat down and I said, well, let me ask you this. What is the end goal for your business? And what they said is they want to sell it in 5 or 7 years, and they want to sell it for X amount. And so if they had to sell it for X amount, they would have to replicate what they have probably 10 or 11 times. And if that was a linear path, and we all know business is not a linear path. I mean, maybe they replicate it 5 times and it goes through the roof. Maybe they have to replicate it 20 times because they can only create half the value. Whatever that is, we just started reverse engineering the process. And so now we broke it down that they would need some more acquisitions in the future. So then one of the things that we talked about is, do you start from scratch or do you acquire another business? When you start from scratch, there's a heavy capital influx that you need typically, and there's a lot more risk. Because you have to develop the client base, you have to start developing the revenue, you have to put in the same process. Whereas on the other side, we put up on the board and reverse engineered the numbers and said, what if you bought a business that was similar to yours with the same revenue and the same profit and things like that? What would that look like if you changed the branding? So we started looking at all those different scenarios that honestly, that people are looking for their accountant and their CPA to do. And so we started breaking it down. And so ultimately what we found is, okay, well, we're going to go with this hotel chain to start. But now we got to find a bank who wants to not only fund that, but maybe fund some acquisitions in the future, which is trickier than you think. Because I think what most people do, or most business owners do, probably what I would have done, 10 years ago is you go to one bank, you go to the bank that you do business with, they tell you yes or no. If they tell you no, you think, hey, that's what all banks do. If they tell you yes, then you just go with whatever terms they have. Or you go when you deeply need whatever you need, that loan, that line of credit, rather than shopping it to many different banks. And so what I did is I set up meetings with 5 different banks. My thing is an 80-20 rule is one's just better than the other 5. The top 20% are just better. So we looked at commercial banks, we looked at regional banks, and so we went through the different strategies to find the right bank to get the right process. So just right now, we've talked to 2 banks. One bank said we'll go conventional loan and felt we could get this done with just a simple signature. Another bank wanted to go, I'll give you the terms. They were looking at, can we do a 3 to 5 year term? They were looking at SBA Express. They want 10% in the deal. And then so as I'm sitting there and questioning and peppering the guy, I said, well, wait, we want a 7 to 10 year amortization or term. Can we get that? We want, we'd rather have no money in the deal. Can we get no money in the deal? She's signing, this client's signing full collateralization or full recourse rather on that. So why do we have to put money in the bank or money into the deal? And so as we're sitting there though, uncovering all these things and really challenging the banker wanted to give us what the least really to get the business. And then as we started pushing them, we kind of started pushing out the loan, started talking about, can we get another loan in 90 days? Can we get a cash flow loan? Can we go to the Andrew Carnegie way of buying businesses? How do you kind of put all that together? And so ultimately, we have 2 or 3 banks going to be able to pit themselves against each other, and you're going to get drastically different deals out there. And so you have to know, what questions to ask the bank, what terms are out there, what is the SBA versus a conventional loan, how does that work for you? And you would not know that. So one is a very large commercial bank that doesn't take a whole lot of risk. I mean, it's a very vanilla portfolio, very vanilla strategy, but not the best for the business owner, where the other one is willing to build that relationship and kind of take on that client. Not to mention, one bank that we went to, not for this client, but for some other acquisitions, said, look, we can lend you $60 million if it's the right deal. We just have to make sure it's structured the right way. But you have to find that right bank and that right financing. So when you look out there and you say, okay, what do I want to do with my business? Well, you need the right partner. You need somebody to, say, hey, where do you actually want to go? And then once you figure out where do you want to go, so you got to create that vision and then reverse engineer it. And how do you reverse engineer it? Well, you have to you have to break it down to the right actionable steps and the right financial steps and the right ways for you to ultimately reach your goal. So as I was kind of thinking about this client, I thought, you know what? Sometimes I think because I know something or I read it and I implemented it, if I did things, I almost think like everybody knows it, and I probably don't share that stuff enough. And I thought, wow, this is a really cool experience, and seeing how happy this client was when we left that office last Friday, that they were like, I would have never known this. I would have never thought to ask these types of questions. I didn't know you could push back on the banker like that. I didn't know that they would change their terms just sitting down with us, let alone ever change their terms. And then they didn't realize that, should I go to a regional bank too, because they have a different lending. One regional bank here in Chicago has a leasing portfolio. So they're actually lending on a hard asset per se versus just on deposits. And so they're willing to take on a different set of risks. So there's a lot of different strategies out there. But what it boils down to is, as a business owner, you need a financial partner. Maybe your CFO is doing it. I mean, we were sitting down today with an IT guy saying, how do we build everything I'm kind of talking about into a dashboard to manage somebody's business on a monthly and quarterly basis? I'm thinking of one business, I won't name it. It's a $50 million top line business, and his CFO and his CPA nothing wrong with, we implemented a couple of tax strategies, but he didn't want to move over to our platform, and he actually has a terrible, so they're holding back his business, unfortunately. And so you need different strategies, you need a different set of eyes, and you need somebody that can think like an entrepreneur and just not down in the details, that can actually understand your vision, help you reverse engineer it, and build a plan and strategy on how do you get there. And so thought that was a powerful story. The results and the outcome, stay tuned. But this business owner is well on their way to creating what they wanted. It's not my dream. It's not my process. It's not my ideas. What it is the ability to ask the right questions and reverse engineer that with them, because we have the right strategies, we have the right vision, we have the right tools. We just need to pull that out of people. So rather than having that rear view mirror accounting that we see a lot of people have, you need somebody who's going to be the partner to say, okay, what are you trying to do? Let's reverse engineer that and let's get you there in the fastest way possible. Because as a business owner, you're a dreamer, you're a manager, and a lot of time you're a technician. So we want to help you stay on that dreaming path, give you the right management system and the right technical skills, if you will, the right process to help you get there. And so as I always say, is what are the right actionable increments that you could break down your goals into. So just reverse engineer that really fast for you, the reverse engineering process. So whether you want to start with this for yourself or you want to come and sit down with us, that's completely up to you. But here's the 5-step process before I go here. Number one, what gets measured gets done. Whatever you want to do, you have to break it down into something you can measure. It's got to be something tangible, right? So the next thing is you have to start with the end in mind. When do you want to accomplish it by? Is it 5 years, 7 years, 10 years? We overestimate what we could get done in a year and underestimate what we could get done in 5 years or a decade. So, start with the end in mind. We got to reverse engineer it. How do you reverse it back so you break it into really tangible things, and that leads into your actionable increments? What are the activities and the actionable increments you could do right now to start putting the pieces in place to start accomplishing that big vision? And then lastly is self-to-self measurement. You have to say is, okay, going out 90 days, what do I want to have done? Going out 6 months, going out a year, 3 years, 5 years, what are those KPIs, if you will, and how do you measure against them over time? And it's really about how do you reverse engineer your goals and how do you kind of put yourself on the right track. So I wanted to share that with you. As a business owner, you don't have to be left out there alone. You could have somebody that has true business acumen, kind of that business consultant, and it approaches it from the accountant and CPA angle, something that you're already paying for that you wish you had, and puts that strategy in place for you. So here at LBS, we're here for you. And any questions you have, please let me know. Any other videos you'd like to see, any other podcasts, anything you'd like to